As the title of this series states, there are, indeed, so many Christmas carols. Everyone has their favorites, and everyone has what they consider to be the most definitive version. As far as purely straightforward adaptations go, meaning live action, not musicals, no gimmicks or anything, the contender for the ultimate Christmas Carol is generally considered to be either the 1951 Alistair Sim version or the 1984 George C. Scott version. I've already covered Sim, and now it's time to finally focus on Scott. There's a lot to love about this version, from its authentic setting to its witty script, but it's the portrayal of Scrooge that really sets this one apart. Scrooge is a multifaceted character, so there are many ways to portray him. We've seen a lot of harsh Scrooges, a lot of curmudgeon-y Scrooges, and a lot of sad Scrooges, but Scott gives the miser a different kind of darkness. This is an especially cold, calculating Scrooge. He approaches everything, from business prospects to the three spirits, with a grim, sardonic sense of humor. He also puts on a much braver face than many of the other Scrooges do when dealing with the supernatural. In many versions, the appearance of Christmas Present gives our protagonist quite a shock, but this one actually acts defiantly. Compare this scene to the musical with Albert Finney.
Come here, Scrooge, I'm waiting for you. Or shall I come in there and get you?
I'm coming!
Come in!
I intend to.
This is indeed an intimidating Scrooge. He raises his voice a few times, but it's the cold, logical Scrooge we see for most of the movie that leaves the biggest impression. He's a tough nut to crack. Typically, the character is shaken by Marley's visit and utterly broken by Christmas Past. By the time Christmas Present arrives, we're already seeing a humbler Scrooge who's a little more ready to listen and learn. Scott continues to keep his heart hidden, only letting it show for small fragments during his time with Present. His soul is still there, but he's worked so hard to wall everyone off, it makes sense that it's just as hard to let it back out. One of his strongest scenes, out of many, is when Present leaves him alone in a dark tunnel. Scrooge, who's done his best to act like he's somewhat in control of the situation, finally has to admit he's at a loss. He's scared, and his pride is wavering like a dying candle. He pleads for the spirit to return, tries to reason with him and offers to continue their conversation, and finally begins to bark angrily, demanding the ghost come back. I don't think the character's utter desperation has ever been more prevalent. It's masterful acting from Mr. Scott. Scrooge is still joyful when he wakes up on Christmas morning, and while we don't doubt his change of heart, it's still an interestingly subdued performance for the most part. This is a man who's rarely allowed himself to be happy, and it makes sense that he's still getting used to the whole idea. I love the versions where the joy spills out of the reformed miser, but I also like seeing this downplay take on his redemption. It makes just as much sense as the others, but it's approached in a different way. The other actors are wonderful as well. David Warner is an excellent Bob Cratchit, and Edward Woodward gives Christmas Present a sinister edge, smiling broadly even as he condemns and ultimately leaves Scrooge. The motion capture version appeared to be going for a similar vibe with their ghost, contrasting unbridled joy with absolute terror, but that version quickly became overkill, while this one adds just enough of each ingredient.
Cannot take me back to my bed. It's too late.
I noticed that as Jacob Marley, Frank Finlay never blinks, perhaps in reference to the valet from No Exit. Marley and his ilk are restless spirits, after all. Finally, Anthony Walters makes for an especially cute, waifish Tiny Tim. While the script is usually pretty faithful to the book, it makes a few changes and additions of its own, as these adaptations usually do. I like that they have Scrooge actually leave work and go to the exchange, where he bumps into the charity solicitors. It adds a bit of movement to a scene that can otherwise seem a little static. We also get to see Scrooge's keen mind for business when he bargains with some other gentlemen. Later, there's a sad, poignant moment with a destitute family shortly before Scrooge gets left behind by Christmas Present. The pain and frustration the father feels at not being able to find a job or provide for his loved ones is heartbreaking. Like the best alterations, it feels like something that could have been in the book, or a number of other Dickens stories. One of the biggest additions is the appearance of Scrooge's father. We hear about him in the book, where he's implied to be distant or outright abusive to his son. In a lot of ways, he's a character best left to the imagination, but I think this movie does him justice. The instant their eyes meet, young Scrooge loses any happiness the thought of his sister and going home have brought him. He's quiet and scared. It's the same sad vulnerability his older self secretly has, without the addition of the many walls he's built himself over the years. I think it's for the best that most versions opt to not show Scrooge Sr., but it's pulled off marvelously here. One of the strongest aspects of the movie, unrelated to its actors or script, is how authentic the sets look. This is because it was all filmed almost entirely on location in Shrewsbury, Shropshire. The crew made wonderful use of the historic streets to create a true Dickensian world for the characters to inhabit. A number of locals were even extras in the movie. If you're interested, the town's website, which I will link to, has a number of wonderful anecdotes about people's experiences during the filming. They still offer special Christmas Carol tours around the holiday season, and in the unlikely event I'm ever in the area, I'll have to consider taking it myself. One of my favorite uses of the set is in how they handle Christmas Future. In the grand scheme, it's the usual portrayal. A tall being shrouded in a dark cloak who silently points at things. We've seen this many times, but it's the way they play around with him that makes him seem even more mysterious. We rarely get a good look at the ghost. He's a little too far away, or he's peeking around a corner, or we only see his shadow descending on Scrooge. At a few points, we see his unnaturally long fingers, as described in the book, but the details are kept vague. Even though we know exactly what this kind of spirit looks like from all the other versions, they still manage to make him alien and unknowable. The soundtrack also gets extra dramatic in these sequences, one of the highlights being the music that plays when Scrooge looks at his own shrouded corpse. It sounds like something out of the Phantasm movies. I'm also fond of the ghost hearse that shows up heralding Marley's arrival, something that often gets left out. For years, I've heard great things about the George C. Scott version. I saw it a long time ago, and after that I'd seen fragments here and there, but rewatching it in its entirety as an adult has really helped me appreciate this version. The actors are excellent, the script is intelligent, the sets are well utilized. There's a lot to love here. This Christmas Carol has definitely lived up to the hype. I feel a little bad that I don't actually have more to say in this review. I can't exactly give a plot recap since you all know the story, and I tend to have more details to cover when the version I'm reviewing takes a lot of creative liberties, or has an interesting production history, or there are some lingering problems I can discuss in detail. This is just a really good Christmas Carol. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend giving it a watch. It's at times a little less overtly sentimental than your average carol, but the emotions are still there, just a little more subtle than usual. It will still get you into the Christmas spirit. I don't like ending things on a sad note, but there is a rather depressing postscript this time around. Ever since filming, Shrewsbury had the prop grave for Scrooge as a permanent fixture in their cemetery, right where the scene was originally filmed. Unfortunately, just a week or two prior to my making this video, the grave was smashed apart by vandals. Truly a shame. Even though it won't really be the same, I hope they're able to restore or replace the grave. Not everyone gets to say they have a fictional character buried in their town. Here's hoping for a positive outcome in a better Christmas future.
Very well. You're devilish hard to have a conversation with.